PJI was created 40 years ago to help repair America's broken pretrial justice system. When he was Attorney General, Bobby Kennedy described the system as one in which it's not the nature of the offense, it's not the circumstances of the crime, it's not even whether someone is likely to be convicted or not that determines whether they're released. It is simply whether they have money. Pretrial Justice Institute works to help establish safe, effective, and fair pretrial decision-making and practices. Practices that hinge on the risk of the individual rather than their bank account to determine their liberty pending trial. Most people assume that the bail system in America works just fine. After all, we've been doing it the same way for 100 years. What they fail to realize is that for 100 years we've been locking up poor people because they're poor and releasing dangerous criminals who have the cash to buy their way out. We work with legislators, policymakers, and the public to introduce safe, effective, and fair pretrial practices. New systems have been proven to be effective. New systems have been proven to be cost-cutting. And most importantly, new systems have been proven to be safe to the community and fair to the individual. Due to our success with the initial states that we've reached out to, we're getting interest from other states and communities as well. We need to respond to that interest. We need to capitalize on the success we've already accomplished and push this issue to critical mass. PJI has had terrific success working with national organizations such as the International Association of Chiefs of Police, the Conference of Chief Justices, the National Association of Counties, victims groups, and others. Our work has resulted in a broad-based national coalition demanding pretrial reform because each and every one of those stakeholder groups has an investment in safe, effective, and fair pretrial justice, as does every citizen. That's why our work in taking this message to the public is just as important as our work with national organizations and policymakers. We understand how pretrial justice works and its impact on stakeholders and on the public. We've convened an unprecedented array of stakeholders to call for national pretrial justice reform. We've gotten them to share the issue as they should. We're not looking to make PJI bigger. We're looking to achieve safe, effective, and fair pretrial justice practices. By getting each stakeholder group to own this issue, we will achieve success. We look at who's in jail and why. If we see jails are full of dangerous defendants who need to be kept there to protect the public, regardless of how much money they might have, that is success. If we look at the release of poor defendants who are low risk, who are now able to join their families, their jobs, contribute to their communities, there's no greater success than that. People often assume that PJI is working to get everybody out of jail. It couldn't be farther from the truth. We simply want justice administered equally, whether you have money or whether you don't. We want those who pose a risk, an unmanageable risk, to be identified as such, and we want others who pose no risk to the community at all to be released to rejoin their families. We want decision makers to make best use of science-based decision-making tools. And we want to capitalize on the success that we've already achieved in a number of states and take that success to reach critical mass nationally. The National Symposium on Pretrial Justice, convened by the U.S. Attorney General, really is a watershed event in the evolution of pretrial reform. It brought together key decision makers, academics, policymakers from around the country, and together they resolved, through a series of recommendations for the federal government, state governments, academia, and the philanthropic community, key issues needed for pretrial reform. As a result, we have mobilized the support of an ever-growing number of policymakers and institutions. We have moved pretrial justice reform to a growing number of states as we achieve critical mass. Unlike virtually every other criminal justice reform, pretrial justice has a natural enemy, the bail bonding for profit industry. This well-heeled group exerts an enormous influence among legislators and other elected officials. They pander to the public's fear of crime. They decry reform as dangerous and expensive, while they continue to reap their monetary profits from the current system. Our popular culture surrounding bounty hunters and the like contribute to a mythology as to how bail bonding works in America. Our work will be to dispel those myths, to make sure the public understands that safe, effective, and fair pretrial justice is possible and is a necessity. Our strategic planning process has identified key states in which reform is most likely. With additional resources, we would focus our efforts in those states to enact legislative reform and to bring practice up to national best practices. We would create model learning sites where other justice stakeholders could come and see how pretrial justice works in a real-life situation. We would promulgate the results of their success to other jurisdictions in order to generate interest nationwide in safe, effective, and fair pretrial justice. And finally, as we have learned from our communications work, we must personalize the inequities and damage done by our two systems of justice in ways that will reach the community, in ways that will touch the public. We now have the opportunity to capitalize on the success we've achieved nationally and take it to the state and local levels. With support, we could develop advocacy in order to enact model legislation and change local practice to meet national standards. We've learned from our experience that an aggressive and robust communication strategy empowers policymakers and decision makers to move ahead, knowing they have the full support of their constituents.